Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Ruskin Art Club sponsored Zoom talk. My name's Tyson Gaskill, and I'm the current president of the club, which is based in Southern California and has been going strong since 1888. We've got an exciting talk this morning with Laura Cumming, whose absolutely delightful recent publication, Thunderclap, will be the main focus today, and we're going to jump right into it. Afterward, we'll have some time for questions, and then I'll have a few short announcements about other events, upcoming events to share. But to welcome our guest speaker, I'd like to introduce my fellow Ruskin Art Club board member, Sarah Atwood. Sarah teaches literature and writing at Portland State University and Pacific Northwest College of Art. Her academic work has been published in 19th Century Prose, the Journal of Pre-Raphaelite Studies, and Carlisle Studies Annual. She's the author of Ruskin's Educational Ideals and has contributed essays to a number of books, including Yale University Press edition of Carlyle's On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, Teaching Victorian Literature in the 21st Century, John Ruskin and 19th Century Education, and the forthcoming Cambridge Companion to William Morris. I think we've got a well-learned Ruskinian here. She's lectured widely on Ruskin, and she's a companion of the Guild of St. George, and as I mentioned, a fellow board member of our Ruskin Art Club. So please, Sarah, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I'm so really delighted to welcome Laura. She's been chief art critic of The Observer since 1999. Previously, she was arts editor of the New Statesman, UK, literary editor of The Listener, UK, and deputy editor of Literary Review. She's a former columnist for The Herald in Scotland and has contributed to the Evening Standard, The Guardian, and Vogue. And she's also the award-winning author of 4 really wonderful books. I'm a great admirer of Laura's work. I have read and recommended all of her books: The Vanishing Velázquez, her page-turning account of the discovery of a lost Velázquez painting, which was the winner of the James Tate Black Memorial Prize; A Face to the World, her fascinating study of self-portraiture; On Chapel Sands, her gripping and poignant account of her mother's life, which was shortlisted for both the Baillie Gifford and Costa Prizes. I've also followed her work in The Observer, and so I was thrilled when her new book appeared last year, Thunderclap, A Memoir of Art and Life and Sudden Death, which has won the Writers' Prize for Nonfiction 2024, is deeply insightful, compelling, and moving. It's a beautifully hybrid work. It considers the great art of the Dutch Golden Age, and in particular, the work of Karel Fabricius, through the lens of art history and criticism, and the context of a love of the period rooted in her childhood and bound up with her artist father's life and practice. Thunderclap is at its heart about what art means to us, how it challenges and transforms us, connects us to other times and places, and to one another, how it teaches us to look closely and attentively at life. Laura writes, "We see pictures in time and place. We cannot see them otherwise. They are fragments of our lives, moments of existence that may be as unremarkable as rain or as startling as a clap of thunder. Whatever we are that day, whatever is going on behind our eyes or in the forest of our lives is present in what we see. We see with everything that we are." And as she says in another passage, art is life, life is art. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Laura. I'm going to turn it over now to you. I know we're all really looking forward to your talk.
Thank you all so much for having me, and that very beautiful introduction, Sarah. It was really wonderful. And oddly enough, you already quoted something I was about to quote myself. Was about the way that we see pictures in time and place. And so the whole of this book is really very much about that. I'm just going to turn this off so that I can see you and you can see me a bit better. I'm just going to begin with a very, very short reading from the opening of the book, which I think really goes to what Sarah's just said about my sense of art. And I would love it if Sarah, who's going to very kindly man the images, could put the picture up that we are going to be talking about. So the first image, yeah, fantastic. I should say to anybody who doesn't know this image, and it's hung in corners in the National Gallery very often, so it's not necessarily that anybody will have necessarily stood in front of it as I have over about 30 years, but it's tiny. It's really tiny. The image you're looking at on your computer screen just now, it's only a few millimeters bigger than that. So here's the opening of my book. I love a painting that hangs in the National Gallery in London. It has to me the atmosphere of a memory or a waking dream. It shows a man seated in deep shadow at the corner of two streets, thumb to chin and fingers crooked as if nursing the remains of a cigarette, eyes down and pensive, waiting. Two musical instruments lie next to him on a table, a lute, shining like a new chestnut freed from the husk, and a viola that reaches invitingly towards you, as if just asking for its strings to be plucked. For you are here too somehow, hovering on exact eye level with the man and his table. The painting, so small and mysterious, is peculiarly alive to the nearness of your presence. It puts you on the spot, on this quiet day when the leaves of the young elms are just beginning to turn, and the man in black sits low at the crossroads. Before him, the cobbles rise up and over the gently swelling bridge into a brighter world of red-roofed houses and dappled light elsewhere. Arriving in London for the first time in my early 20s, I found a strange counterpart in this painted figure. He too was on the brink of something, or perhaps nothing at all, a loner on the edge of events. But he stayed still, never changing in his time and place, while I tried to make my way in this unfamiliar city without knowing what I was doing. The waiting man became a fixed point. The picture in which he appears, this one that we're looking at on the screen just now, was recently, very recently, retitled for the umpteenth time. You will, all of you, know that trait of great national galleries, that they're constantly retitling pictures. And it is now known, as of last February, as A View of Delft with a Musical Instrument Seller's Stall. And I find this outrageous because I think if there's one thing this painting is not about, it is the musical instrument seller's stall. It is, for me, so centrally about this dark figure on the wrong side of the road, as it were. And of course, if you look at it, and especially if you know it, you will see written on the wall so discreetly behind that lute, C. Fabricius, 1652. If you can, don't know if you can just see that in my not very good reproduction. So this title, which is a really very recent thing, and of course titles are very recent, seems to me to attract attention to all the wrong things. If you look at this man and imagine him relaxing his hand and dropping it down across the table, it could almost touch you with the tips of his fingers. And I don't really know why this title ignores him. And I particularly minded it when I was young, that nobody ever focused upon this man, because he seems to be so central to the picture. Everything revolves around him. If you can imagine him gone, what is there? Well, there's a view of Delft. Certainly it's there. We can see it. It's exactly as it looks even now. And if you go to Delft, you can find the spot, as I have, where the perspective is to where the painter, where Carol is sitting or standing, perhaps, to make the work. There's a sushi shop now and a trainer shop, but other than that, that view is very, very unchanged. The back of the church is still there. The gable, the Dutch gable end houses on the right-hand side are still there. And even actually that remarkable tree, vast now, is still, I think, or perhaps one of its descendants is still growing on that spot. So for me, he was this, I mean, I'm in my 20s, and for me, he was this very much this sort of existential figure, if you like, so this sort of timeless outsider. Unfortunately, I'm afraid I have to confess, I smoked roll-ups in those days. And I always felt that he looked like he was about to, pluck a filament of tobacco from his lip, the way that we did. And I found his preoccupation very magnetic, and I still do. And the painting came to have a very huge importance to me. I went to see it all the time. And I had a job it's in Trafalgar Square, obviously, and I had a job a bit further up Charing Cross Road, and I was having this really kind of disastrous love affair, and I used to go down Charing Cross Road through the back of the building, past this little tiny painting, which has always been very lonely and overlooked and solitary, like the man. Until this book came out, and now they've moved it into a very public spot. But it used to be very, very much on its own and in a corner, like the man. And so I would come through the back of the building, and I would, you know, as it were, get Dutch courage from him, and I would come out the front, cross past Landseer's Lions in Trafalgar Square, and then I'd take the tube to this terrible love affair. And he came to be, if you like, the man of my dreams, really. I started to like him more than I liked the man I was going out with, and he was also, by the way, an artist. And so we used to argue a lot about what could be said about art. And for me, what I felt I saw in this painting, and continue to feel, and I see it all the time and have done all these decades, was this a man more or less living inside his head, as this image is showing us. And I felt that the other aspects of this painting, which were very much more interesting, certainly to conservators at the gallery, and certainly to the useless boyfriend, they were very interested in the fact that it was made to be put inside a perspective box. So it's painted on copper, and it was meant to be bent inside this strange wooden contraption, of which very few are still known. And this would supposedly resolve the perspective that we're all looking at. So suddenly this sweep up and over and the table and so on would all fall into place. Well, it's not true. And I can recommend what I suppose is my kind of amateur art historian way to prove that that is not true. If you take a photocopy of this picture and bend it so that it's effectively making its own little curve, and look, not much changes at all, barely anything. What would occur inside a perspective box would that it would be more private. There would just be one hole, and you would look through it, and you would have this view of Delft, which is part of its title, as we can see. And in looking, you would get the revelation of something very bright inside a box, a closed box, a sort of microclimate. And I love the fact that the box has disappeared, probably smashed to pieces by a passing child or something. You know, a lot of these, they were rather rare, these boxes at this point. There is one still in a museum in Scandinavia, so we can see what they would have been like. And there have been attempts to turn this painting back into effectively almost like a sort of cinema inside a box. And I'm very thrilled that it's been liberated from that box, because it's so far, in my view, it so far exceeds any function it might have had as a sort of optical trick. So people who love the painting as I do also feel the loneliness of this figure. And if Sarah wouldn't mind, in a second we're going to go to the next one. The only thing that was ever written on the wall in those wonderful days before we had huge text panels was the name of the painter, the Dutch artist Karel Fabricius, and his dates, 1622 to 1654. And if you did the existential arithmetic, you could work out that he died very young. And I couldn't care less about this, alas, when I was a child. I was only interested in the man and the magnetic painting. And I didn't know anything about him, and I didn't really want to know anything about him. But I would eventually become an art critic, and I was constantly assuming at some point I would come across more of his paintings, because I loved this painting so much, and I never did. And so years would pass, and Dutch art would come, flower painting would arrive, and he was never in it, and landscapes would arrive, and they were never any by him. And I found it very strange, and I began to get more and more interested in the missing, effectively the missing career of this artist. And I didn't believe, and I think the book, I hope, demonstrates conclusively, I didn't believe what was said, which was that he died young, and that's why we don't really have any work by him. and the circumstances of his death, a massive explosion, the Delft Thunderclap, which obviously gives my book something of its title, that everything he painted must have been, you know, exploded too. As if this great, great painter had never sold a work, you know, and we knew that he had. So that theory that it all went up in flames, rubbish. So why did he leave so few works? Very recently, last week, a new work by him turned up. So that swells the total to arguably about 14, perhaps, known works, maybe 13. Some people think it's even less. The only other painting by him that I had ever seen was this one, which we're looking at here now, which Sarah's put up, which is his self-portrait. So this picture came into my life because it was projected in black and white in a school classroom when I was growing up, in a talk on the apostles and disciples and pupils of Rembrandt. So we know that this man had spent some time in Rembrandt's house in Amsterdam, and we knew that he might have learned quite a bit from Rembrandt, and he was always being shown in this school talk. He was Bol, Flink and Do and Fabricius and so on. All these people were just kind of acolytes. But I thought this painting looked nothing like all the self-portrait, either the self-portraits of Rembrandt himself or the acolytes who painted themselves in the manner of Rembrandt, because there is so much light in it. And if you look at this painting, this phenomenal painting of a wall, so there was the painting of the wall in the first painting we were looking at. It's almost like a kind of living portrait of the wall itself. So beautiful. And this amazing brushwork. I don't know whether any of you can zoom in or look very closely, for example, around the mouth area, where exquisite painting. Pink, green, blue, white, all these marks which are effectively decoupled from the things that they're describing and yet resolve into this marvelous, sad mouth. The color, the density of color in this painting is something else. And then there is this light. And when I was looking at this picture as a slide, I didn't know it was going to have so much color in it. And when I finally saw it, I was really astounded by it, because despite all of its color, for me, it's the sort of snow, the snowiness of the painting and the sadness of this man. He's low down in the painting. This is not a classic self-portrait where you would normally find, I'm sure you're very familiar with, the head would be much higher up, but he seems to have sunk down in the painting. And if you look closely at the eye, facing on your screen, the eye on the left, this wonderful load of white paint, it hangs in the eye socket like snow on a bough. And I felt very keenly that he was a man of, yes, a man of sorrow and a man of winter. And he was brought up in the Little Ice Age in Middenbeemster, which is in a part of the Netherlands, Poldert. It's about 28 kilometers out north of Amsterdam. And he's growing up at a time when the snow is very, very thick and the ice grips the land. There's a wonderful set of meteorological accounts of the period that he's living in this new little settlement, of the ice coming and going, occasionally thawing, but mostly coming back again. And the line in those archives, which are beautifully known as the Waterland archives, describing a furrowed field just in the winter, around about the time that he's born. And it says that the account says the ridges of the ploughed field were so sharp with the ice that you could sever an artery if you fell upon them. So he's a man of winter insofar as he's living in this terrible, terrible cold. But I felt that he was somehow a man of winter in other respects too, and that he feels alone and solitary and sorrowful. And I knew that this painting was painted several years after the death of his wife and his first child, his second child, and his third child. And they had all died. He married at the age of 19, and they were all dead by the age of 21, when he was 21. And he didn't paint again that I can see for a very long time. And I described that in the book as a kind of pictorial silence. And I think it's something that happens with Rembrandt too. When Saskia, Rembrandt's wife, died, he didn't paint in oils for a considerable number of years. And I think it's, yes, a kind of paralyzed sorrow that I felt in this man. So this was the only other painting by him that I knew, and I embarked on this book to try to understand a bit more about why he was so sorrowful and why he painted so little, given the genius of the painting that we're looking at just now. So Sarah, if you would like to bring us up the next picture. This is the very first Dutch painting I ever saw, and I can't see the faces of anybody in this group, so I don't know whether you're smiling, but I'm hoping that you all are, because it's the absolute classic Dutch Christmas card scene. That certainly something that was in my childhood, people sent a lot. These lovely skating scenes with, that you can see the visible cold in the dark, the wonderful depth of the painting, and that lovely sort of sugar pink and misty grey, and figures all disappearing away, skating into the distance. Fantastic. So this painting was on the wall of my primary school classroom, my first classroom, and so I was very young, and I didn't really know who they were or what it meant or anything about it, but I could see that they clearly were in another era. Their costumes were very old-fashioned. However, in Scotland, in Edinburgh, where I come from, our national painting is a wonderful painting by Henry Raeburn called The Reverend Walker Skating on the Ice. And he had, in fact, learned to skate in the Netherlands. And so this idea that people are very cold and they skate a lot, this all felt very connected with Edinburgh, where I grew up, and so on. And I thought this painting, which was very large, it is a very large painting, in fact, despite appearing so miniaturized. I thought this painting was the actual painting on the wall of the classroom, and I didn't have it. I mean, it was a long time before I discovered that it was actually a reproduction, of course. And I asked my father, a painter, about this picture, and he said, that will be a Dutch winter landscape. And I thought, and why not, that was effectively the way you described certain kinds of art. A Dutch winter landscape is a landscape, topographic, and yet we all know what we mean when we talk about that in terms of art. And I was very fascinated by this artist. His paintings were everywhere. When I moved to London, there were so many of them in galleries in London. They're all over the world. You have them in Washington, you have them in New York. They're probably, I don't know whether there are any in Los Angeles, but certainly a very, very prolific painter. And I loved his paintings, and Hendrik Averkamp, and about him I knew nothing whatsoever, just as I knew nothing about Fabricius. But this particular picture, which has remained with me all my life as a reproduction on a wall, I used to think, and hope that you are also thinking, where is the painter standing to see the scene? Where is he? What do we know about the Netherlands? They're flat, totally flat. And yet somehow he is just above them, looking down from this bank, and he's not among them and not of them. And I went to see his drawings, prolific and wonderful, wonderful drawings, which are in the Royal Collection in London at Windsor Castle. And there are hundreds of these drawings to accompany the paintings. And all the time you would see this painter just apart somehow, observing. Wonderful scenes, people often very comic, people skating along towards a hole that they can't see but you can, and so on, and great tellings off going on between young people who are skating too fast and their parents, and so on, but always with this yes, observation that they were real people, but he is remote from them. And the next picture, if you could put it up, Sarah, it'd be great. Can we see it? Yes, here he is. So this is the artist. And again, on the screen that you're looking at, this painting hangs in a private collection in Amsterdam on the Prinsengracht. And if you look at the picture on the screen that you're looking at now, this little tiny image is very much smaller. It's about almost a third of that size in a vast scene. And the scene is showing a game of golf, as it was called. And you can see his little golf ball there, and his golf stick. And he has, I think, rather wonderfully, he has scratched the score into the ice beside him, and a lovely joke. He's given himself full marks for this painting, where he appears in his little sort of signature form. And his counterpart in this teeming scene is the tree next to him, this sort of, blighted tree. And if you see the painting in reality, you can see his nose is a little bit red, and he's askance. He's in the usual position of a sort of signature self-portrait in a vast scene. So he's on the edge. But he also isn't somehow connected with the scene, except in this observing way. And again, I knew very little about him. Hardly anybody knew very much about him until quite recently. And I'm just going to read this little statement from the archives of the place where he lived. In the municipal archives in Kampen, where his family moved from Amsterdam, there is only one mention of this painter, who is so prolific and so loved and in so many collections. Hendrik Averkamp de Stumme is paid 12 meager guilders, a very small amount, for painting horses on the wall of a town stable. Averkamp de Stumme, it means Averkamp the dumb, or so people thought. For centuries, people thought this meant that he was quiet, mute. He didn't speak. It's kind of effectively like the Sphinx of Vermeer. So he's a mystery. We don't know. He never spoke. And that was pretty much the view of art historians for quite a long time, until the discovery of the last will and testament left by his widowed mother in 1633. And this was only found really comparatively recently, and she petitions the town magistrate to permit a special annuity from the family capital after she dies for her dumb and miserable son. And we would nowadays call him as a non-verbal, deaf as well as mute. So I think these scenes where everybody is there, the Dutch are amazing. They, in the Little Ice Age, they all live outside. They do everything. They conduct business, throw parties, have games. They even have weddings on the ice. And this man is out there among them, but not with them. And he dies a few months after the death of his mother. So he was my kind of introduction to Dutch art, because his work is the sort of typical Dutch skating scene. But my really huge thunderclap, I suppose, is the next picture, which Sarah will show you. And alas, I can't see anyone's faces, but when I'm talking about this painting, I'm always fascinated to know if anybody knows the painting, and shocked that so few people still do. This is this incredible painting of asparagus is by Adrienne Courte. It's in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and the site of it was I'd gone to a lecture. The lecture was in French in the Modern Language Institute next door, and I didn't understand it. It was Derrida, the philosopher, and we were all, as students, we were all desperate to hear him speak. I couldn't understand anything really that he was saying, and I was very ashamed. And I slunk next door to the Ashmolean Museum, which was a very, in those days, very kind of antique, dusty, low lumens, old butterflies, and so on. And you could kind of hide yourself away amongst the shadows, which I did. And I found myself in the Dutch art room, which is floor to ceiling, as you know, and it so often is the way that Dutch art is shown. And in this whole vast room of, colossal lobsters and, chunks of cheese and herrings on platters and so on, was this painting, which still shatters me. this extraordinary light, the laser line of the edge of the stone ledge with a little crack in it, and this sheaf of white asparagus, very young asparagus, which have more light in them somehow than asparagus could ever really have, and which I imagined hanging in the house, in a Dutch house in the 17th century, in darkness. And it would have been more, one imagines it more brilliant than candlelight. A staggering work. Why is the asparagus tilted in this way? Why is the crack in the ledge related in some way to that twine that's just keeping all this kind of charismatic light together? Everything about the painting, it is not a painting of a bunch of vegetables. It has something clearly to say about composition in art and light in art. And I was enthralled by it. And I then saw a painting that hangs in your country, in Boston, if Sarah can put it up. Amazing Museum of Fine Art in Boston. So there is the ledge again. There's the crack again. The light has changed somewhat. Everything he's painting is on this ledge, this stone ledge. And this painting, I think, spectacular, and introduced me to the idea, as no other painter ever has, that a painting could incorporate sound. So you hear this kind of chorus line of shells, and this middle shell, which is sort of tick-tacking along its spines along the ledge towards the little orangey red one, as if it was trying to dance a pas de deux. You know, it's an amazing piece of painting. And Court, his name, there it is running along the bottom, quite effortful, the scripting in the painting. And you notice how the light is filling the crack, and it just astounded me. I've seen quite a lot more of these paintings since. There aren't very many. And as you probably all know, they're painted on paper. An unusual and remarkable thing, actually. I mean, you can think of painters, Tiepolo paints oil sketches on paper, and you can think of artists who do it, but excuse me, I always found it very strange that these little works, this one that you're looking at is about this size, not much bigger than a postcard. There is one painting by him, which is even smaller than that, in which you see two walnuts, and the walnuts are huge. I mean, bigger than walnuts should be, and on the ledge in the dark, no idea what's going on in the background. Nothing, no sense of really what's underneath that table or what world you're in. And I love this painter, Adrian Courter, who was painting on the backs of pieces of used paper torn from, in this case, the account book of a trader, Dutch trader trading in Gdansk in the early 17th century. And you can see in some of the, one painting I've seen by him, you can actually see the lettering through the paper on the back with numbers and so on. So what about him? I mean, he is not painting a skating scene. He's not painting anything that we could recognize as being especially Dutch. And I was thrilled to see this because, you know, I'd been brought up really more or less to believe that it was skating, or it was herring, or it was, you know, a woman cleaning a floor of Dutch tiles and so on. And the unutterable condensed originality of this work that you're looking at, just sensational. So Court, I knew almost nothing about Court, and hardly anyone did until two Dutch historians, amateur historians and not in fact art historians, managed to discover a little bit more about him. But it is my contention, and I would love to know what you all think, that the other thing they think they found out about him, I think, is correct. Nothing known, no trace of him, except once in Zealand, in the market in Middelburg, being fined for trying to sell a painting of peaches on the stone ledge in the market without being a member of the guild. Otherwise, barely any trace of him. Who collected his work? Hardly anybody knew. The paintings all seemed to stay in Zealand where he lived. Why is he painting this same chunk of stone with objects on it over and over and over again. Where is he sitting? It's a bit like the question about Abercamp with the skating scene. Where is he sitting? Why is he doing this? People bring him pieces of paper. He paints fruit. This is probably the most exotic by some way. I mean, very often they're green gages or red currants. And the two art historians came up with, I think, what I believe to be the most persuasive and accurate and rather tender-hearted. I think, is it a diagnosis? It probably is, that he's very close to that ledge and that's his world. He's disabled. He doesn't move from the spot. There's no, the one and only trip is the only time he's ever seen outside. Perhaps someone took him there. And I think I can imagine this. For this man, the shells and the peaches and the green gages and the asparagus are the world. So I love him, Adrian Court, and I hope that one day we will see more of his work. This painting, if we go to the next one, this is, as you know, a great masterpiece from your country, Hals. And I was trying to find out more about Court. And while I was trying to find out about him and was contemplating the latest figures about Dutch art, which had been established pretty much long ago by Simon Schama, you know, the idea that art proliferated in this Dutch Republic as nowhere else. And somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4 million paintings were produced by 600 to 700 painters in not quite 2 decades at the mid-century. And actually, I think Simon Schama has rated that higher and think it's closer to 4 million now. And if you think of all the paintings that have been junked or burnt or lost or have fallen apart or have been drowned in the sea, there are a huge number that went to Catherine the Great in Russia that were lost on the voyage. If you think about that, you think, you know, there must have been millions and millions more. And I don't think I can think of a precedent. It's a painted nation, a nation entirely painted. There's no other parallel that I can think of. And I came across, looking for Court, I came across a beautiful piece of work, again by 2 art historians. And this is a recent study of Golden Age Leiden. And this study goes right into the actual houses to find out where all these paintings are hanging. Because if we think, you know, it's easy for us to say that a rich man, such as the man we're looking at, would have had, you know, paintings all over his walls. But listen to this. A printer has 70 paintings in his home, from the cellar to the kitchen and on up to the attic. A scientist has 172. 2 vicars and a church warden have 75 pictures between them. I don't know how many paintings you have in your houses, but I certainly don't have anything like this number. The proprietress of the Target pub sells 52 to the local chemist. The innkeeper has 102. And best of all, the inventory of a wealthy brewer, Hendrik Booger van Ring, who had a house on the Grand Canal in Leiden, and he had 237 paintings. And in one room alone, he had 64. It must have been, you know, literally, I think, frame to frame to frame, right up to the ceiling and down to the ground. And I alas, if there is a portrait of him still surviving, I couldn't find it, but I'm giving you this man because he is, of course, himself from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. He is himself a magnificent example of a brewer. I think a man of astounding prowess and incredible girth, the silver satin, and in every respect, this whole kind of the halo, you know, around the hat that's so vast, and that collar, which is about the size of a tablecloth. And I love this painting, masterpiece of a painting. The power of the man and the power of the painting, I think, are astonishingly matched in this wonderful work. And so it rises up to his stature. It's a masterpiece. And I felt very strongly, as I'm sure you all know, that Hals, this great master painter, not very long after he painted this, he had all the contents of his house were removed by bailiffs and taken, because he had failed to be able to stump up the money to pay for a baker's bill. And of course, in later life, he will die, more or less in poverty, with a tiny little annuity given to him by the town council, which was smaller than that bill for the bakers. So I always felt very upset about this, and very much wanted to write this book because I felt that all these great painters who were painting at a time when there was such a glut in the market, were never given their due. And because Dutch art is everywhere, for me, it's like coming home. I love it so much. It's so democratic. It never overlooks anything. It paints everything. And yet it feels to me quite often that it doesn't get its due, and that it clearly, even in their own time, these artists were not getting their due. If Sarah comes to the next picture, for us. Yes, this beautiful, again, this is in Washington, in your country. This beautiful scene by Jan van Goyen. Van Goyen appears in the inventory I was just talking about more often than any other painter. He was, I think, it's generally agreed, probably the most prolific of the better known painters in the Netherlands. He leaves something over 1,000 paintings, and those are extant. And even copies of paintings by him were mentioned in the inventories. And keep in mind, Karel Fabricius, maybe 13, you know, and this man, 1,013. So this is Jan van Goyen. I love Jan van Goyen for his spirited overcoming of the most terrible economic obstacles, because he makes a bit of money and then he invests, and it's disastrous. You've all heard of tulip mania, and one of the catastrophes in his life is that he does invest in tulips, and it's thought that the tulips he invested in were emperor tulips, which are striped, I think I'm right in saying, but someone can correct me, purple and white. And by the time the bulbs had grown, they reverted to white. So they were of no value whatsoever. He lost a huge fortune. And this painting that we're looking at comes after the loss of the fortune. And he is already beginning to turn necessity into advantage. He has to work more thriftily because he has no money, but he does have a market. So he started to paint in, I think, the most wonderful way, using the paint very much more thinly. So it's very diluted with terps, and it's very thinly washed onto the surface of the canvas. And very often you can see the canvas straight through. And I love this because it's an aesthetic advantage for his work. The whole of the Netherlands is moisture. These enormous skies are filled with it. The landscape is so profoundly has been, you know, restored out of water. Water is everywhere. And in his paintings, he's always got these little figures moving around amongst it. You can see the man at the front there who's just about to get very wet, and they're just about to get out of that boat. The boat's very low in the water, and all these people are, it seems to me it's probably quite late in the day. He used this wonderful thin technique to create this feeling of circumambient moisture in the air. And there's a beautiful word a Dutch art historian applies to his work, stemmigheid, a mood of subduedness towards the end of the day when everything is still and getting quieter, and the light is beginning to get lower in the sky. And his late works, I think, particularly beautiful, very, very golden. And alas, he becomes a property developer, and he invests in a floodplain. So you can imagine what happens there. And for all of his gifts and all of his extraordinary industry, he dies more or less in poverty. His story is not quite as terrible as the man who is coming next, if Sarah can move us on. This is a painting also in America. Almost all of these, I mean, so much great Dutch art in America. This is Emmanuel de Witt. And if I may, I'm just going to read a tiny bit about him. He's a church painter. as you see. He's kind of making it up a little bit. This is not one church or another, though he did paint to commission, and he sort of hated painting to commission, and he's famous for having been very irritable when people came up to him and tried to talk to him in the church. And you can see a little dog on the right, and a sweeping brush and so on. Very often in his scenes, what you might be seeing on the right will be the digging of a grave. Usually there are many more people in the scene. There are sermons are being preached and so on. But this one, there is no congregation, no gathering, no hint of a sermon. Two men are quietly talking. Very small figures are observed on a bench, far away beneath the soaring window. A picture of light, transparency, and grace. And then there is the passage of light through another window, streaming across to meet the light from this one. And most wonderful of all, the dappled form outside, a tree, or something like the impression of a tree, as a kind of celestial nature, spectral and remote. The colours are so beautifully laid there, faint evening warmth, the world slowing down, the silence steepening. Barely any colour beyond variegated greys, here and there a faint golden line indicating a shining chandelier, or the glow held inside the panel of the choir stalls upstairs. I want to be there in that place, where late afternoon rays steal across the floor and the world outside is as soft as a dream. De Witt has become Prospero. His labours now are ended. This is a very late painting by him, and his is, I think, the saddest story in my book, because he gets into every kind of trouble. His first wife dies very young, and then he makes a terrible second marriage to somebody who turns out to be a criminal, and he is constantly in trouble. He's exiled from Amsterdam into the outskirts, and he never has a permanent address from the age of about 60 onwards, and still painting more or less as a sort of indentured slave to various people, landlords, who give him bed and board in order to take the paintings that he paints. And he very late in his life, he's already 80 and still working. He has a row with his final landlord, and it is New Year, and it is the Little Ice Age. And he's living in Amsterdam, and the row is terrible, and he goes out to hang himself from a canal, the bridge over a canal, and the rope snapped, and his body dropped into the water, and the ice that night came very fast, and he was trapped, or his corpse was trapped under the ice. And the Amsterdam, again, the Dutch are so wonderful at keeping records of everything, and the records are precise to show that this really did happen. The thaw takes place not until February the 17th, and a person at a lock in the centre of Amsterdam sees the body under the ice thawing, and it's Emmanuel de Witt. So it's the most desperate story I can think of, really, in terms of great artists and utter destitution. And so I'm probably writing a little bit as a kind of campaign for these great painters who are so somehow still so unacknowledged, strangely. So our man, Karel Fabricius, what becomes of him? Nothing. Total silence. Years and years and years of total silence, until we hear of him painting a portrait of a man who has loaned him money, and then we hear of him getting married again. And at this point, he marries a woman, and he goes to live in Delft. Leaves the sadness of Middenbeemster behind, and goes to live in Delft. And he is there at the same time as this painting. Actually, not quite at the same time, but so the painting that we all know so well, this greatest masterpiece by Vermeer. And I'm showing you this painting partly because it's so very great, obviously, but also because it's actually showing you a sort of Sunday morning calm after this terrible thunderclap that takes place on the 12th of October, 1654. And if you look at the painting and look at the left-hand side, just on the other side of where those buildings are and into the distance is where this thunderclap takes place. 10,000 pounds of black dynamite, which had been stored under the ground, go off, and they take a huge chunk of Delft with it. And at the time that he is living in Delft, he's there at exactly the same time as Vermeer and Peter de Hoogh and so many other great artists. It's sort of amazing. The comparison was made, I know, has been made in the past with Greenwich Village and the abstract expressionists. Nowhere could there be a greater number per capita in such a small place of such genius as this time in the mid-17th century among these great Dutch painters. And so it's thought, people always like to suggest anyway, that he must have, Fabricius must have taught Vermeer something because of all the light that appears in the paintings of Fabricius. I have no way of knowing that. I somewhat doubt that he was ever taught by Fabricius at all, but that they would have known each other, no question, because Vermeer and he's a teenager at the time that Fabricius arrives, but his father kept the pub. They dealt with paintings. They bought and sold paintings. The house of Fabricius and the house where Vermeer, or the pub where Vermeer's father was the landlord, are a stone's throw from each other. They all crisscross through the market square all the time. They will have known each other, no question in my mind. And this scene is showing you, as it were, the obverse of the tragedy. So you have no hint looking at this great painting that it could possibly ever have occurred. Maybe if you want to think there's something in the storm clouds, but it's always so overcast in the top of Dutch paintings. So this is where Fabricius has now gone to live. And if we look at the next painting, it's wonderful, wonderful, the little street. I'm showing this to you quite apart from the fact that I think for me, it is the greatest of all of Vermeer's paintings. But I'm also showing it to you because it's 3 streets from the little street where Fabricius will die. And I'm also showing it to you because Vermeer, when he died, also young, also poverty, also terrible. When he died, he left the inventory of the work that he owned, of all the paintings that he owned as a dealer himself. 3 paintings by Fabricius are in that inventory, and Fabricius is named. All the other painters bar one, all the other painters are, it just says, a landscape, 2 cows down by a river, a plate with a herring on it, whatever. But not Fabricius, who I personally, I do certainly think Vermeer really revered him. And he had 3 works. And the reason I'm showing you this great painting, the sort of staircase to heaven and the overcast sky and all these incredible geometric forms. Oh, it's such a wonderful is because of this figure in the doorway. We do know, I think, that this isn't Vermeer's house. It's probably his aunt's house, but it's very like the one that he would have lived in. And I had this painting in a exact scale reproduction on my wall during the lockdown, and I used to look at it and look at it and look at it and so on. And I got very obsessed with the doorway because it is through such a door that the 3 paintings by Fabricius go into Vermeer's house. And the newspaper that I worked for blew up the doorway for me. It massively magnified it. And miracles. I have no idea how this is possible, but there is voluminous space going way back in the magnification that you can't see in the actual painting itself with ordinary eyes. I just don't know how it was done. Anyway, 3 paintings go through a door such as this, and they stop. 2 of them stop in the hallway. And I wonder what they were. If we were thinking there were only 12 to 13 paintings by him still surviving, what were they? What could Vermeer have owned? What could he have sold? What might his widow have sold? And I have thoughts about this in the book. If we can go to the penultimate image in this talk. Thank you so much. This is a self-portrait. This is 1654. Lots of people think this painting is unfinished. I absolutely don't. He's signed it. The date is on it. He's outside. It's extremely hard not to see that smoky atmosphere as being ominous, a portent of things to come. I think it's generally accepted that it's probably very close to the explosion now. And this is amongst his very last works. Hint of Rembrandt, clearly. There's the metal gorget and so on. But again, not only is he not in a kind of Rembrandt brown study, he's right outside in the world. I think perhaps more cheerful than he was. I don't know. But again, this painting hangs in the National Gallery in London. So I see it a lot too. And I think it's very, as a self-portrait, it's very reticent, very sort of, it's large, but he's somehow in retreat for me, very much, especially in the eyes. Hardly any brushwork there. The painting is very, very thin, very fine. And we're coming to the end. He will very soon die. He's painting in his house, painting a sexton from the church that we saw in the very first painting. And with him is a pupil who's mixing colour, and his mother-in-law, and we think his wife was probably not in the house. And they hear the clock chime, the bell tower chime. The bell from that church is missing in the Vermeer painting View of Delft. So we certainly already know that it's after the explosion, but that's another telling detail in it. And they're working, and the explosion happens. Colossal. There are drawings of the aftermath with a kind of terrible ground zero in the spot where the former, it was a disused convent, and all this gunpowder was being stored underground. And there's a tiny detail of a man. He was called Cornelius Sotens, and he's a civil servant, and he'd been sent on more or less it's kind of his first job. And he's wearing a red coat. Someone remembers him moving through the streets with a red coat. And he opens the door to go down, and nobody quite knows how the explosion occurs, but there is great volatility in black gunpowder. If you remember the port of Beirut, the terrible explosions in the port of Beirut in 2020, the same thing again, which is some spark and then almost like a chain reaction. And some people have speculated, I don't think this is right, but some people have speculated that the key was very rusty, a spark as he opens the door. I think much more likely he has a lantern and he goes downstairs, and he is, of course, atomized, never seen again. And so are many of the buildings around the spot. And Fabricius, his entire house, the thunderous sound goes through the ground, and then the foundations collapse and the roof drops, as happens now and as happened in Beirut. And he is buried underneath the timber and the roof and so on. And everybody else died except for Fabricius. And it took them several hours. It's thought they finally managed to get through the smoke and the hell of Delft to him around about, it's thought, 4-ish in the afternoon. And they carry him over 2 bridges along 2 little streets in this tiny, tiny place that we were looking at, to the church. And he dies on arrival at the church. And he is buried. He's buried in the same church as Vermeer, but there is no mention of him there, and there is no grave, and his name is not written there. And this, if Sarah could show us the final image. And he is the artist of this painting. So the Goldfinch, this absolutely astounding work, with its exquisite painting of a wall and of a figure with their back to the wall, as in all of these paintings we've been looking at by Fabricius. And the bird, as which we all so well know, and that sudden moment when you first see the bird appearing to look at you, and you feel it's alighted and you have arrived, and there's this extraordinary abrupt recognition between you, and then, as we know, you notice a terrible, cruel chain that's attaching it to this kind of, I always think it's a bit like a kind of opera box, with the brass railing and the bird there that can never leave. Very, very incredible piece of painting, that flash of yellow. And when I first saw it in reality, I had a postcard all my life, but when I first saw it in reality, all the things that people generally say about this painting, that it's, you know, it's a masterpiece of trompe-l'oeil. It is not. Every single one of its painterly effects is openly declared. There is no attempt to deceive the eye in this way at all. And you see those two streaks of oil and yellow on the wing. They declare themselves immediately as you look at the painting. And yet it has this extraordinary force of personality, and a deeply moving painting. And if you stand in the Mauritz listening to people talking about it, they are always, I feel, infinitely more moved by this painting than they are were really by the portraits of people around it. So this wonderful painting, I just want to end by saying that I feel that this is one of the paintings that goes through the door, a door like it in the little street, into Vermeer's collection. And the conclusion of my book involves the extraordinary work of a Danish conservator, Jorgen Vadum, who was the first man to CT scan a painting. And I believe this, I'm not sure if it's even been done since, but I have been to visit him and seen the scans. And the scans of this painting were necessary to him because he felt that it's painted on, as you know, a chunk of wood. And it was necessary for him to know more, to see into the brain, as it were, of the painting, as we might with a CT scan. He wants to know more than the surface could tell us. And so a conventional X-ray wasn't giving him what he wanted to know. And looking at the scans together, we could see that the surface of the wood and the paint, it is covered in minute pock marks, the traces of an explosion. And you can't see it when you stand in front of the painting in the gallery, which is again why the X-ray is not much use to us, but you can see it in the CT scans. So this painting shows us that the work we're looking at now was in the house when the explosion occurred. And although the painter did not survive, his painting did. So the art survived. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really wonderful. And I mean, the images are so striking, and these slides are so clear. You know, I show slides a lot when I'm teaching and stuff, and these are just so clear that we can really look closely at them. So thank you so much. And it was so wonderful to hear you talk about this art, because what comes across to me the most in your book and in your talk is the deep connection that you have to it. And as someone who I also feel that for a lot of art and a lot of paintings, and I can hear that in your voice, I could feel it in your book, and that's what really draws me to your writing as a whole, but especially in this book. And that emotional power, you know, art is life, life is art, that we feel. I was thinking about the National Gallery as you were talking about your experience there, and I've not spent anywhere near as much time in it as you have. I wish I could. But that feeling of rounding a corner and seeing a painting that you've looked at in reproduction all your life, and there it is. And it just hits you in the chest and in the heart, and you stand there, and everyone around you kind of fades, and just you in this painting. And that is such an amazing experience. And so to hear you describe that, and to, to understand what it means to have these paintings that come to mean so much in our lives. Yeah. Thank you
Do you
so
know
much
that
for
that
this.
fantastic quotation from Robert Hughes, where he's describing himself as a young man in Australia, and all he's got is black and white reproductions in magazines, and he says they bear the same relation to the actual work when he finally gets away from Australia and comes to Europe, as a shrunken head to an actual living being. And I think that, I mean, in a way, it's a wonderful thing, and I'm very a great sort of proselytizer and enthusiast for reproduction. Because it feels to me marvelous that I could have a fridge magnet or a postcard or on my phone or whatever, and look and look and look all the time. And I mean, I've got that self-portrait on my phone, and I think the reality of the work, though, and its physical being and its relationship to you, it's so, they don't paint these pictures for your eyes only, do they?
No, absolutely. And I was thinking that the last time or one of the times I was in the National Gallery and was doing that, rounding the corner and coming across the Arnolfini portrait, or the ambassadors, or any number of portraits that, and pictures that have meant so much to me, and kind of gasping and stopping and wondering later what I must have looked like to everyone else, because I was just having a moment with painting on my own. But I wanted to tell you too
that I mean, I think they should have, personally, I think they should have chairs for people to sit and weep. I mean, people do that great T.J. Clarke book, The Sight of Death, where he goes and he goes and he goes and he goes to look at the Poussin forever and ever and ever. And I don't think, I mean, some of these paintings are so inexhaustible. You could be, looking at them forever. I can remember going to, for the first time in my life, going to this place, America, and going to the Metropolitan Museum, and I could not believe the scale of the Clifford Still paintings, because all I'd ever seen was, nobody ever said, "Oh my God, it'll be like, a mountainous effect." And equally, when you see, I was trying very hard to probably not very competently, but to explain to you that first painting means so much to me because it's so tiny, and you're looking right into it. And when people have gone, I was really hoping people would go and look at that painting, and sure enough, some people very kindly have tweeted, and they get there and they do. They take a photograph of themselves standing next to the painting, so you can see just how small that painting is. And I think, well, great, and but that's not really the point,
right?
It's still either. So,
well, and I should tell you too that the last time I was in the National Gallery, I was there with Philip Hoare, who is also a great fan of yours. And we were talking about your book, which he had read at that point in advance, reader's copy, but I had not yet seen. So he was talking about, I'm going to forget the name of the painting, so forgive me right now. I can picture it perfectly, but I can't remember the name. But it's an avenue of trees, Dutch Avenue, that you talk about in the book. And so we went and found this picture, and he was talking to me about what you had been saying about it in the book, and we were looking at it carefully. And so you were there with us.
Oh, that's so wonderful. The painting, that's the avenue at Middle Harness, which maybe you all know. I love this painting so much, and it's this sort of flying avenue of supernaturally tall trees. It's just a great painting, and I wanted to write about that a bit because obviously the great Dutch specialist is Svetlana Alpers, and I feel very mutinous, actually. I feel quite mutinous about some of the things this very great professor has written, because so much of what she's talking about doesn't really treat, and neither does iconological interpretation of Dutch art. It doesn't treat at all the absolutely eye-popping, incredible vision that you were looking at. Never mind the where it's set, or what does the skull mean, or is it photographed, or what's the etc. And so I wanted very much to write about the Dutch art, just because of the reason I've given, which is they don't paint for, neither do they just paint for your eyes, artists, but nor do they just paint for Svetlana Alpers, I suppose. You know, so I'm against the traditional views of Dutch art as being, you know, all about how things look, you know, just photographic and so on. This is very much the view of Henry James, and very much the view, I'm afraid, of a leading figure in British art, of course, Joshua Reynolds, who is constantly saying, oh, I went over to, you know, his great tract on European painting, where he goes over and he says, oh, you know, just, you know, I've seen one bit of painting of silk, I've seen 20, and oh, you know, it's so, and Henry James, who says that the woman, the maid coming out of the house, reflection in the canal, you can't tell the difference between them. That's all there is to it, you know. And I always feel, no, it's staggering, the amount of the court paintings that we were looking at earlier. Every time I show that, I've done some lectures about him, and every time I show those court paintings, people actually audibly, wow, you know, it's not about the a facsimile of a green gauge, is it? You know, so yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah,
You've got great Dutch. There's so many of the book, the paintings in the book are in American collections, and I often wonder what was the, you know, what was the Americans were really early with the purchasing of Dutch art. It must have meant something to them too, you know. I hope from the heart.
Well, and that painting of the asparagus, which really does just take your breath away. You know, and especially the way that it just glows from that dark background. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it's, as you said, you know, it's not just a painting of asparagus. You know, there's so much more going on there. Yeah.
There's in fact, in the book, there's I was writing about a painting that probably some of you know, which is a court painting of wild strawberries, and they are arranged like it's Iwo Jima. It's absolutely, so that two of the strawberries are hoisting the flag, and they're all rising, and it's a piece of they're always choreographed, these paintings, or directed like stage productions somehow, and it's just a pile of wild strawberries, you know. And in the book, I wanted people to know how important he was, and I thought probably one way, well, not just visually, but important to the Dutch, and I thought one way to do that was to point out that the first person who was buying paintings by Adrian Court, when they finally started to sort of emerge from this spit of land in the North Sea, Zealand, when they started to emerge, they were bought by a man in The Hague called Arnoldus de Stum. I'm sorry, my Dutch pronunciation is very poor. And he hangs a painting of 5 apricots, and they're like meteoric. There's planetary action going on with these. A wonderful painting, and he hangs his painting next to his other treasured work, which is The Girl with the Pearl Earring.
Oh, wow.
When he dies, he gives them both to the Moritzhus because he loved them so, you know. So people are always amazed to hear that, you know, there's anyone except for me.
Right. Well, I keep talking, but I'm going to turn it over to anyone who has questions. I don't want to dominate the the questions.
Actually, I'm noticing, sorry, I've suddenly realized I've talked a lot, haven't I?
Oh, you're absolutely fine.
Thank you for your time slot.
No, absolutely fine. Tyson, you had a question?
Sure. I really appreciated both of you talking about how when you walk into a place like the National Gallery, you know, there's a certain painting that you need to see. And now I've got to see the View of Delft one. I mean, at the National Gallery, for me, it's always Giovanni Bellini's Portrait of the Doge that just looks so amazingly lifelike. I want to just start like talking to him because I feel like he's right there, you know, not even a painting. But I'm curious, why do you think, Laura, that the goldfinch has so transfixed people? I mean, obviously, the novel by Donna Tartt may have had something to do with it in the past 10 years, but obviously before then as well.
Everybody will have an answer, of course, all of you. But for me, it is because it's a kind of painterly humility. So what is it? A little pet bird trapped, just a couple of brackets, some nails, his signature, and that amazing wall, a living portrait of a wall. And the reciprocity, I think, for me, you see it, it sees you. You both are, to return to what I was saying right at the beginning, you are both aware of your mortality. You're both aware of potentially of being trapped in some way in your life. The bird is a magnificent piece of portraiture of that particular bird. So you're not looking at any old bird. You are seeing this creature which is aware of you and which is vulnerable, and which, I mean, I sometimes feel that the painting, it's in a huge dark wood Dutch period frame. It wouldn't have been, because I mean it wasn't in a frame, and it's not thought that framing and Fabricius are complicated issues, but and I feel secrecy of understanding, a rapport with the bird. And where do you feel a rapport with a bird? I mean, you might in reality, but you spoke about the Doge and the directness of the Doge and its living force of personality for you, and that bird has it, I think. I've seen people crying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they did an amazing study. The Mauritshuis is very inventive, I think, about trying to understand why more people don't look at Dutch art. I mean, of course we do. We all look at Rembrandt and Vermeer. Of course we do. But and they did a little test to see with school children, to see how long it would be before school children noticed the chain. And I forget how they did organize this, but it was a few seconds. I mean, it was much longer than you think it's going to be. The person of the bird declares itself much more slowly before you notice that, you know. And if you think of, you know, classic paintings of, you know, Samson in manacles or whatever, you know, you or even wild horses in Jericho, so you see the restraints at the same time. But something about that bird, and also I will say this, of course, because I do really think it. It's beautifully said by an American art historian, in fact, that he flings open the shutters. So we've been looking at Dutch art, and it's all very dark and so on, and then Fabricius comes along and the shutters open, and then we get Vermeer lights. So yeah.
Does anyone else have just a question or a comment? I was thinking about that painting too, what you were talking about, how you don't see the restraint at first. That's part of the power of that painting too, I think, because we look and we think we're seeing, and you kind of said this in your talk, we think we're seeing one thing. And then we realize there's something else happening too in that painting. We see the restraint and the, you know, the freedom of this bird who looks, as you said, like it's just delighted. We realize that's not the case. And yeah, so it's a complex painting, even though it looks at first so simple.
And one of the reasons we know it was in the explosion, which that CT scan I mentioned reveals, is that the paint is new. It's young paint. It hasn't dried. The wood hasn't split. He's still working on it. And that particular conservator was able, who cleaned that painting in full public view for 2 years at the Mauritshuis in a glass studio. And he felt, he has a very deep relationship with that painting, but he felt that by the end of it, that the painting had gone on and on and on being painted. So what a thing to consider, that an era where you could have made a lot of money from painting a tulip.
Right.
His idée fixe, if you like, is that bird still and still, you know. I mean, wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's
over there in America.
really wonderful. Yeah, no, really wonderful. And I encourage everyone to read the book too, because she's given us a lot of wonderful taste of the book, but there's still much more in it as well. There's a whole thread with your father's work as well in the book. Yes. So yeah, it's so rich. And I mean, I'm someone who went in already loving Dutch art, but learned so much, you know, from it. Made me think of it in different ways too. So really rich.
But it was lovely to talk to you all. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
That's cool. Not at all. Have a good day over there.
Thank you. And I'm
Thank
happy
you
to
very
do
much.
happy to do a little wrap up here for everyone. So as Sarah said, thank you again, Laura, for that remarkable talk, and to you, Sarah, for facilitating it. As you all noticed, we recorded this and we'll be posting it soon to our YouTube channel, which I encourage you all to subscribe to. Be sure to visit our RuskinArtClub.org website. We have a wealth of information there, a lot of resource material on Ruskin and on Ruskin-oriented organizations around the world. Very recently, we've begun adding some terrific podcasts, including the latest one, an interview with Dinah Birch. While on our website, I also encourage everyone who isn't already a member to consider becoming a member. The information is very, very easy to find on our website. Next month, we will resume our Ruskin study sessions where we delve into Ruskin's own essays, beginning with Traffic on Saturday, June 8th, and then another the following weekend on June 15th. You can sign up for those on our website as well. Our next online lecture will be with our very own Gabriel Meyer here on the Zoom, who on Thursday, June 13th at 5 p.m. will be speaking on Notes Toward a Sufficient Life. Gabriel will reflect on practical applications of Ruskin's ideals to lifestyle choices here in the 21st century. At the heart of these efforts is Ruskin's concept of the sufficient life, a lifestyle of artful simplicity, mastery of life crafts, imagination, and ethically responsible consumption. Ruskin linked these values to the concept of the good life. Members of the Ruskin Art Club will be familiar with these ideas, not only from Ruskin, Morris, and Thoreau, but also contemporary thinkers like Wendell Berry. So please do join us for this reflection and discussion on the promise and challenge of translating Ruskin's values into practical reality and into the way we live. And then very lastly, we have a tour on Friday, July 19th of the very Ruskinian Apricot Lane Farms in Moore Park. Details for this are on our website as well. Thank you all, and we'll see you right here again soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Tyson.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.